We're up to page 180. Let's start now in the new section on Hashgacha, page 180 in this version. And if you have the English version, then it'll be the section on providence. Hashgacha comes from the word lashgiach. Lashgiach means to oversee. And Hashgacha, therefore, describes God's overseeing, his providential care over creation. You might be familiar with this term in Kashrus. Hashgacha. Mordechai, are you a mashgiach? Yeah, an ex-mashgiach. Huh? In any case, mashgiach. Hashgacha, providence. So, hine. Hadon Baruch Hu, mashgiach tamid al kol b'riyosav. He is constantly looking over with a providential eye upon his creations. Umekayimam umenalam kefi tachlis sheba'aviro baram. And he is constantly sustaining them, that's mekayimam, umenalam, and directs them, conducts them, kefi tachlis sheba'aviro baram, according to the purpose for which he created them. So that we literally say that not only is God the creator of everything, but that God is constantly maintaining creation as well. Like we say, "Mechadesh b'chol yom ma'aseh bereshis." God is constantly renewing every day the act of creation. But it's not only something which takes place every day, it takes place every moment. And the idea is that if creation is a, let's say, manifestation of the divine presence, so that God really would not have to proactively create every moment, because God simply exists, and existence is an extension of God. So what one way of viewing this is more from the Kabbalistic point of view, is that when we say that God is constantly renewing creation, what that means is God is constantly affirming the process by which creation comes into being. How is that? Through tzimtzum, by refraining from expressing his essence entirely. Because, as we mentioned yesterday, part of our notion of God is that God is not only infinite, but absolutely infinite. There is, therefore, absolutely nothing other than God. Anything that exists in the place of God is therefore just a facade. It's a facade. It's really a fictional reality. And the way this takes place is that really, because of the intensity of the absolute infinity of God, there should be nothing other than God anywhere. There should be absolutely only God everywhere. In fact, there should be no space that we could even describe as being everywhere. Right? And therefore, right, creation comes into being through what we call tzimtzum, which is a process whereby God withdraws or constricts the intensity of that absolute infinity in order for something that appears to be other than God to come into being. That means then that God is constantly renewing his pact with creation by constantly holding himself back. Because if God were to, as it were, let that absolute degree of absolute infinity reach its absolute conclusion, there would be absolutely nothing other than him. And therefore, God retracts, does what's called tzimtzum, diminishes somewhat the intensity of its absolute infinity in order for creation to seem to come into being as something separate from God. However, of course, in truth, the energy from God is ultimately what is energizing creation. Okay? But if it were let loose, as it were, if it were expressed in its full degree, there could be nothing that we would perceive as creation, because there would be only God. That requires, therefore, God to be constantly aware of and be involved in the process of creation through withdrawal, and constantly overlooking the extent to which the divine energy is introduced into that place which becomes space that is the realm of creation. And in a way, that's providence. It's God's constantly renewed evaluation of the extent to which God should either be withdrawn from or introducing himself into the world. This is hashgacha. It's a balance, a constant balance. And it takes place in all realms of creation, through the entire hierarchy of creation. V'umnam, b'yoshin isyached hamin ha'enoshi liyos bo hasachar v'ha'onesh kefi ma'asav, since it was decreed by divine wisdom that the human species should be the ones who are judged according to reward or punishment, meaning, as we discussed yesterday, receiving the reward of closeness to God by connecting to God through Torah and mitzvahs, or acquiring deficiency, incorporating deficiency as a result of either not learning Torah, not performing the mitzvahs, or proactively transgressing. All of this is according to a person's deeds. As we described above. The providential care, overseeing of God over mankind is going to be therefore necessarily different than everything else. Why? Because there's what we call hashgacha kalalis, which is the general providential eye that God has over creation, which is akin to what I was describing earlier, where it's a constant reevaluation of the extent to which God withdraws or introduces his presence into the world, right? Which certainly has an effect on the quality of creation. And there's a flux, increasing and decreasing. But there's also hashgacha pratis, which is God's providential care over human beings, because not only is there a general need to equilibrate creation in a general sense, but God is constantly reacting and interacting with the world through the judgment of human beings. And that's a much higher, more specialized degree of hashgacha, right? Because the extent to which a person is connecting to God, so he's deserving of God's connecting to him to a greater degree. And the extent to which a person repels God, so it's causing God to make a commensurate withdrawal. And that's taking place not only for every single person, every single moment, because we're constantly making free will decisions, even if those free will decisions are not translated into action. But we're constantly making free will decisions. How so? If it's not in the plane of action, plane of thought, and the plane of speech. Right? So that literally every single second we are exercising free will. Should I be thinking this thought or should I not? If I should be thinking of this thought, should I be thinking of it in this way or should I not? And should I be thinking about it in this way? Should I be thinking about it now or not? Regarding that person or not? We should constantly be thinking about what we're thinking, what we're saying, and what we're doing. And everything we do, therefore, on those plane of thought, or speech, or action, by virtue of the fact that those faculties are energized by nefesh, ruach, neshama, and that spiritual plane of nefesh, ruach, neshama that we described yesterday is interconnected to the spiritual realm. What that means is we're constantly in this state of interaction with God through free will, using these three levels of our soul and those planes of action, speech, and deed. And God is therefore interacting with us accordingly. And that takes place not only with within a person, but every single individual person, Jewish or non-Jewish, every single person alive. Can you imagine, what God has to keep in mind? Yeah, that's hashgacha pratis. That's the way in which God's providential overseeing is different regarding the human species than with other things. Vizeh.
So, before we continue, does it mean kind of so as God oversees the animal kingdom, it's kind of like us breathing. We can't control it, but most of the time it just happens
involuntarily.
Yeah. But God interjecting into human life is kind of like writing a piece of paper.
Kind of like what? Writing a piece of paper?
Writing on a piece of paper. Would that be a correlation, or would it also be like breathing for him as well?
That's an interesting point. I mean, the analogies are so different, the breathing and the writing. But because it's interesting, just thinking about it. Initially, it would seem that even the relationship between God and human beings it can be explained with the analogy of breathing. and it's kind of like but I'm sure, but it's almost like there's an inhaling and exhale. There's a sharing of I don't know. It's almost like a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Maybe that's what I have in mind. Yeah, that God is like exhaling, meaning imparting the breath of life into creation. I guess maybe that's what you mean to say in your analogy, comparing that to the animal kingdom. But not only the animal, but all of creation. That God is breathing, as it were, life into creation. He's inflating creation. Although I mentioned from a Kabbalistic point of view, it's less seen as proactive as indirect. So God is not like proactively creating, but God is actually withdrawing in order for something to come into being. But with human beings, it's more like writing a script, maybe. That should mean like writing a piece of paper.
Even for a simple analogy, Santa's list. He was good today. He was bad today. He was good today. He was bad yesterday. Because it says right here that it depends on our deeds. The good.
Yeah, but it's more than just making that judgment. It's responding. In other words, it's making that evaluation and then responding accordingly.
Do you get cold today, or do you get presents today?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I mean, Tehillim says Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha, that God is your shadow on your right hand, and the Baal Shem Tov in Hasidus explains that what that means is God is shadowing you. Yeah, so as you move your hand, the shadow follows. So when we interact with the world, God shadows us accordingly. And if we're interacting in the world, either on the plane of thought, speech, or action in a positive way, then God is going to evaluate that and introduce and interact with the world in a positive way. But if, chas v'shalom, people are acting in a way of impurity, repelling God, so that's going to cause God to react as well. So, I don't know, is there such a thing called like shadow boxing? Like the partners are kind of like responding to each other's movements like that? So it's that type of a thing in a way. So it's interesting that in this way, we actually have power over God. We're calling the shots. And God is responding to what we do. God is constantly maintaining creation, it's true. But in terms of his providential rule over the world, it's really a rule which is, generally speaking, reactive to what we do. So that we really call the shots. And this is also connected to a different pasuk in Tehillim, which says, Tenu oz lelukim. Tenu, give oz, power, lelukim, to God. So Gemara asks, is it in our power to add or to decrease power from God? God is omnipotent. God's power has nothing to do with us. What does David HaMelech mean when he says, Tenu oz, give strength to God, empower God? So Gemara means what it said. We have the power to empower God. It's true that God is omnipotent, but he set up the system in a way where his power is shared in the world commensurate to what we do. And therefore, we literally call the shots. We have the power to cause God's hand, force God's hand to bring bounty and blessing in the world. Or we can also make the decision, God forbid, to force God out of the world as well. We can force God out of the world as well. So it's all up to us. Tnu oz Elokim. And perhaps that's why the verse uses the name Elokim instead of Yud Kei Vav Kei. The first verse I quoted was what? Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. God, meaning Yud Kei Vav Kei, he is your shadow on your right hand. The right hand is generally considered to be positive. Like it says, Yamin Hashem osechayel. The right of Hashem's hand does valorous things. So Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, utzilcha al yad yaminecha. If you use your right hand for the right, in other words, if you act in a right-handed way, if you do the right things in the world, if you're connected to Chesed, you're connected to Torah, you're connected to mitzvahs, so Hashem is going to shadow you and is going to give you blessing accordingly. Tnu oz Elokim is you have the power to empower God. Elokim describes God's power of rulership over the world. And therefore, we, as it were, have an effect on the way in which God rules the world. Tnu oz Elokim. We empower God and therefore dictate, as it were, to God how he is going to rule over the world. Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, you mentioned that God kind of shrinks back in order for something else to take up the space. So So doesn't that introduce a duality into our concept of, like, if God is everything, then what is filling the space is necessarily not God? So how do we...
Yeah. So this is kind of like this is a problem that rises from this field of Kabbalah, which is called Maseh Breshis. And it's exploring this dichotomy that I was talking about before, which on the one hand, God is absolutely infinite, therefore there can be nothing other than God. Yet we see there are things which seem to be creations which are separate from God. And how can you have both? So one way of explaining this is as I was kind of suggesting earlier, that on the one hand, God withdraws in order for the absolute infinity of God to create a scenario where the absolute infinity of God does not sear anything that would come into being out of creation. On the other hand, it's that very energy of God which is reintroduced into what's created. Actually, it's the energy of God which is redirected in a limited way, which brings about that creation. So it's actually one and the same thing. It's kind of like, what would be a good analogy for this? What results is a spectrum. What results is a spectrum. So that within the realm that God has withdrawn to, as it were, you have the highest degree of God's absolute infinity, but that is gradually reduced, creating, let's say, a different manifestation in a different plane of the spectrum, a little different place of the spectrum. But that I don't know, that part of the spectrum is still being generated, still being energized by the source. I don't know if that's the greatest analogy either, but another way of thinking about it perhaps would be this analogy we've discussed in the past. If you have, let's say, white light, and that light, well, this might be a good example. Yeah, the prism analogy. Right? The white light is refracted through the prism, resulting in different colors of the spectrum. Those colors seem to be different than the white light, but in truth, they really are the white light, just refracted into component parts, and they can be re-refracted back into that initial oneness as well by sending them through a prism again. So that, in truth, the one light seems to be different than the different component parts. But in truth, all of them are actually the white light. So that's what's happening here. The brilliant intensity of God's infinity is being withdrawn, so that the multiplicity can seem to come into existence as something separate from its source. Although in truth, that multiplicity is perfectly united and harmonized within the source itself, right, within that one light. So, getting back to Hashgacha, ki Hashgacha b'shar aminim hu l'kiyum aminuhu v'ois ha'mechukim v'hagvulim sheratzo yisbarach shemo. Because the providence which is involved in governing other species, it's only for the purpose of maintaining and preserving, right, that species according to the laws and the limitations that God wanted regarding it. I don't know, did you mention something about zebras? But a particular type of animal, right? God's hashgacha over animals, yeah, for example, zebras, is only for the purpose of maintaining the species of zebras. God is not particularly interested in any particular zebra and what happens to any particular zebra. Or at least the hashgacha over any particular zebra is not going to be a result of anything that particular zebra does. There could be hashgacha over that particular zebra for the purpose of fulfilling God's general plan for the whole species of zebras. Yeah? But it's not going to be a function of anything that particular organism did or didn't do, thought or didn't thought, or felt or didn't feel, doesn't think or doesn't feel. So the only purpose for providence over any other realm of creation is just to preserve creation. V'hinei, yashgiach beprote kol min v'min, l'masha migia mehem el klal min kulo. And therefore, God supervises individually. God will have individual providence over any particular organism of every species, only according, not to the needs of that individual, but only according to what God dictates is necessary for the entire species in general, right? Which is what I was just saying. Ach lo lema shehem ishim, but not according to what those individual organisms within the general species are. Kihine, and etachlis bam elel shleimus min haklali, because there's no purpose for the individual other than it's being part of the general category. So God decided that there should be birds in the world, and there are many types of birds. Each type of birds has its own purpose. God is not interested in any individual bird for that individual bird's sake. Rather, if he's interested in the individual bird, it's only insofar as that bird is one piece of the entire puzzle, which makes up the species of birds that God is interested generally in having in the world. Umnam hamino noshi, however, human species is different. Kol ish v'ish b'meno, every individual organism of the human species, milvad ma shemegia mimeno el klolos amin, aside from its being affected from what's decided by God over the entire general species of human beings, he will also be judged individually on what that person is himself. V'yudunu ma'asav kulam b'yichud, and all of his actions. I pointed out, though, strictly speaking, I don't think it's limited to actions, because it's relevant to emotions, to speech, to thoughts as well. But in any case, all of the person's sphere of activities, his faculties, are going to be judged individually. V'yigzor alav gzeros b'yichud, and there will therefore be decrees that are decreed over this person specifically, specially directed towards this person. Kefi pratus inyano, according to this particular constellation of this person's, let's say, life, his spiritual state. Okay? So then, let's say, for example, it could be decided that God decides, for whatever collective reasons, that there should be a particular providential influence over a people, a nation, a geographical area that might, let's say, be one of bounty. Yet, each individual within that sphere of influence that God has decided to act with in the way of bounty will also be judged. So that even though there's general plenty, any individual might not be privy to that plenty because he doesn't deserve it personally. Or vice versa. It might be decreed that over a particular nation or ethnic group or people or whatever the case may be, that there should be some catastrophe. Nevertheless, individuals will be spared based on their own individual merit. And it's not just for the purpose of affecting the general group of people or the nation that he's a part of. It's as a result of this own person's individual activities. Yeah.
More two questions, but I'll try to make it one. Where you have God's providence over the animal kingdom and God's providence over man, which are separate because the individual matters with man and not the animal kingdom. Would it be God's providence if man causes an animal's extinction?
Would it be what? God's providence if man causes animals extinction?
Or is that man going against God's love of animals and taking upon himself and causing harm to the world as a whole?
I think it would more like the latter. I mean, I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're suggesting that it could be part of God's providential, let's say, ruling over the world, that he kind of sends human beings to go and eradicate animals? Because God...
Like the dodo bird. Humans directly influence the extinction of the dodo bird.
Yeah.
Was that God's providence over the dodo bird's life in the cycle of humanity, or was that man...
Humans' irresponsibility.
Yeah, irresponsibility.
Yeah. We have a mandate to preserve God's world, and we have to treat it properly. We're allowed to use it, but we have to use it responsibly. And the Midrash says, yes, I've created a wonderful world, but I'm only going to do it once, so make sure you take care of it. We have a mandate. Since we were created B'Tselem Elokim, and we mentioned that Elokim refers to God's power of rule over the world, human beings do not have the quality of Yud K Vav K, which is creator. We're not creators. Yes, but we were created B'Tselem Elokim. We were created in the image of God. What does that mean, created in the image of God? You have to look at the Hebrew. The Hebrew says we were created B'Tselem Elokim, which is a specific name of God. right? Elokim, this is the point that Nefesh Chaim elaborates on, connotes God's rule over the world. So God gave human beings rule over the world. We're like stewards over the world. And that means we have responsibility for running it properly according to the divine will. And human beings can be irresponsible and set fires and eradicate rainforests and do all types of horrible things to the environment. And that's that's going against the will of God. If we use the world properly, with proper responsibility, even if it involves taking the life of living things or eradicating other living things within the boundary of what's considered to be acceptable and responsible without harming the environment, so forth and so on, the extent to which we're able to gauge that, we're allowed to do that. But it has to be done with the sensitivity that this is a creation of God. It was there before we were, and we have to show it proper deference. Right? God created us in a world which was ready-made for our use, but it was there before we were created, and we have to show deference to it. And therefore, no, I don't think God would send human beings to eradicate his species. Maybe God sees that for the balance of the food chain, there has to be some reduction of a particular species. So maybe God would, send it. But I think more often than not, God would affect the natural world in a way which would either enable the increase or cause the decrease of these animals in order to maintain the chain. God is not going to temper, it's not going to affect our free will or rely on our being responsible or not in order to maintain the food chain. He doesn't need us for that. He'll do that himself. Bring more water, bring less. More predators are born, less. I think that's more how we do it. V'tzarech shetida. Second paragraph on page 180. You should know. V'tzarech shetida she'umnam peulos ha'adam techalakna l'shnei minim. The activities of human beings are divided into two categories. Ho'echad humashu lo schus or. The one is referring to actions which for him will either be merit or the opposite of that, liability. Thank you. Dainu sheyaseh ba mitzvah avera. For example, if he does either mitzvah or avera, so that's one sphere of activity, the plane of mitzvah or avera, good or bad, merit or liability. Vasheni mashe'eno lo zeh v'lo zeh. The second category are things which would be considered neither this or that. They're not necessarily good or bad, or mitzvah or avera, or causing merit or liability. Ke'en ba'inyan lo l'mitzvah v'lo l'avera, because they're not really related directly to a mitzvah or an avera. V'hinei. Before I go on, there's just one point I wanted to mention. I said that we were talking about, you put it very nicely, Justin, when you're saying that the God's providential care over the rest of the world is only on the general, because the individual doesn't matter. Whereas for human beings, it's over the individual, because the individual, of course, matters very much. That being said, certain strains in Jewish thought, and particularly Hasidus, does place maybe a greater emphasis on God's providential care even over the non-human world. And that God is interested in every single part of creation. The author here is also saying that God is interested in every piece of creation. Only he's saying that his interest in any piece is really only in consideration of the whole. But in Hasidic thought, I think you see it being a little more subtle than that. And one famous example of this is, I believe it was the Baal Shem Tov, was walking through the forest with one of his disciples. And as they were walking, a leaf, which was detached from the tree, came floating through the air and landed somewhere not far from where they were. And the disciple asked the Baal Shem Tov, is God's providential rule over the world, is his overseeing eye so detailed that God would even cause the detachment of this leaf and cause it to fall specifically where it is? I mean, is God's providential care go that far? And so the Baal Shem Tov said, yes, certainly it is. And you should know, you go overturn the leaf, you'll see why. So he walked over and he overturned the leaf, and there was a little caterpillar there. And the Baal Shem Tov said that caterpillar was suffering from the heat, and it cried out to God for shade. And therefore God caused one of the leaves of the forest to be detached and blown and fall specifically over that caterpillar to give it respite from the heat. So it's an interesting point. I don't know exactly what basis Hasidus has, if this, to the extent which is true, to describe hashkacha pratis in this way over the animal kingdom, the non-human kingdom, more than most of the Rishonim seem to indicate. But nevertheless, that seems to be kind of Hasidus' take on things. Of course, it's still not going to be so much because of merit or liability, because, for example, the caterpillar doesn't have that. But at least God has compassion over all of His creation. Like we say, V'rachamav al kol ma'asav. God's compassion is over all of His creation. So God saw this caterpillar, as it were, suffering from the heat, and the story describes it as the caterpillar calling out to God, for shade. God's listening and causing that specific, V'hinei kol ma shenogea l'mitzvah or vera, regarding the first category, anything that is connected to a mitzvah or vera, hiyeh be'ezet tzad sheyeh, to whatever extent that might be, kulo mosur b'yado shel ha'adam, it's all given over to the hand of a man. Ein lo mi sheyachichehu alav klal, nobody can force him to do a mitzvah or to do an avera. It's entirely in his power to choose to do either the mitzvah or the avera. Val kulam yashkif ha-shoifet elyon, and regarding all of these actions, for good or for bad, that a person chooses to do, God oversees. God is the supernal judge on high, and He sees. L'dunosam kifi ma shehem, in order to judge people or the actions according to what they are, good or bad. V'ligzor kenegdam hagmul harui, and to decree a befitting reward for them, whether for good or for bad. V'ashereinu inyan lo lemitzvah v'lo levera, and regarding the second category, which is neither specifically a mitzvah or an avera, hini inyan behem ki inyan shar haminim b'mikrehem. In this respect, man is like all other parts of creation regarding the things that happen to them. Shine yovo lo koyach elyon shinano elav, there will come some power, force on high, which will operate on the person. Im l'shmiras hukois mino, either for the purpose of preserving the laws that regulate that species, o lahagia lo sechar ha'onesh kefi ma she'ru'i lo,
he'll get the punishment of,
or to bring upon him the reward of the punishment that is coming to him. So he seems to be saying that there is there's a difference between human beings and others, and this is based on free will. That's what results in hashkacha pratis. And God is therefore judging and reacting to the good or bad things that we do. There are other spheres of human activity, I guess, which are not mitzvah or avera. Like, for example, I don't know, based on this description here, what he might be referring to. In truth, everything is either a mitzvah or an avera. But there are certain things which we call reshus. Okay? Let's say, for example, eating. Eating is reshus. Of course, within eating, there is a permitted and a non-permitted way. But in general, eating is not necessarily a mitzvah. The way you eat is. So therefore, God is going to govern the human species according to the need of human beings to eat in a way which is going to be independent of the way any individual, this is how I'm understanding it, the way any individual human being eats, either as a mitzvah or an avera. However, God can also use this general providence also as a way of bringing the person reward or punishment. Okay? That's what I'm seeing here. So that there is for the neutral activities of human beings, which are not specifically mitzvah or avera, God brings about the influence of the world, which is going to provide for the needs of the human species in general. And this person is going to receive a general portion of God's general providence over these things which are neutral and neither mitzvah or avera for human beings. However, included in that is the possibility that this influence can also be part of the hashgacha pratis of the person as well. That's what he's getting at here when he says, in the Shmiras Hagabin, lahagia lo schar o onesh k'fi mashu ilo. Or he can use this general form of hashgacha also as a venue through bringing about reward or punishment. So that, for example, God has to provide for the human race's need for food. And that's going to be a general need which is independent of any particular mitzvah of error that a person or that people do. However, since every individual does need to eat, within the general decree that's decreed upon providing for the needs of the human race, God can also decree what extent of that general decree is going to reach that particular individual. So it's like a combination of both hashgacha klalis, which can also be modified according to hashgacha pratis. Yeah. Do you have the English open?
Yeah.
How does he translate the last part of that second paragraph?
With regard to deeds that do not pertain to virtue or sin, however, man is no different in his experiences from any other species. In such cases, he can be motivated by higher forces, both in order to maintain the human race as a whole and to bring each individual in his appropriate reward or punishment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's fair. I think the way I read it is more or less consistent with the way the translator chose to translate it. That there is a general hashgacha over human beings, and even that general hashgacha can also be used in an individualized way to bring about a person's either reward or punishment. Let's try and finish off in the remaining minutes we have here, this section. V'ine, on the top of page 181. V'ine Adon Baruch Hu, behold, the Master, may he be blessed. Hu mashgiach al kol, he oversees everything. V'danes akol, and judges everything. V'gozer kol exeros, and decrees all of the decrees. V'hamalachim hem misharasav memunim kol echad besafkidoi lahanias akol begvulov. V'im lahamtzi lo'adam kidrochov al tzad hagmul k'mo shermanu lamala. Once God sees the way people in general acting or individual acting, decides what providence, either in general or particular, to bring over a person, the way God brings about the result is going to be through angels. Right? What are angels? Angels we call in Hebrew malachim. We've discussed this when we were learning the earlier section. A malach is so called because it's related to malacha. What is malacha? It's a servant doing work. And that's what these malachim are. Malachim, angels, are not white-robed winged creatures floating through space. Right? Malachim are actually pockets of energy, which are actually divine directives, through which divine will is expressed in the world. And therefore, when God makes a judgment, what God does is he sends energy through the particular part of the system of creation, which sends a flux through that part of creation, and it's going to result in either an increase or a decrease, or affect the way in which the divine energy, which is flowing through that conduit of creation, is going to be expressed into creation. And this is what he's calling a malach. Right? So what it's saying is, therefore, that God is not somehow going to directly affect creation, but rather God is going to manipulate the way in which divine energy is directed through the channels of creation, either to increase or decrease, or to change the quality of that energy, and therefore, that's how the change is going to take place. Further, you must know, even though God certainly in truth does know everything, and there's nothing hidden from him, and there can be nothing new or novel brought before God that he didn't know of his own. However, as far as the overseeing, the ruling, the governing of the world, it's not done according to this. Rather, rather it is ruled according to the system of judgment or justice that God put into place. And this can be compared to the hierarchy of a kingdom in the world, a worldly kingdom. And therefore, all of these matters which affect the world are judged in the courts of the angels, based on the testimony of testifying angels that come and bring their testimony, the categorim, Shi'it Budin, and also accusing angels which come and bring their accusations, Umelitzim She'elitzu Schus, and others which are speak in favor, try and find favor, as opposed to fault. V'kulam malachim shemasam mashizacharnu. And all of these are different types of angels, as we've described above. Ella lehoid al hanase ba'olam. All of the purpose is for them to come and give testimony of what's happening in the world. Ella the kacheg ve'ela lahalitz, certain to speak against and others to speak for. V'nikmar din kefiha mishpat anochon v'yashar. And the judgment is decided as God considers to be appropriate. Here he's touching upon a very deep principle, which is elaborated in the book in Derech Hashem in part of the section of Providence. And it's a bit much just to swallow in a minute or two. But if I can try and summarize what he's getting at is as follows: is that God certainly is aware of everything that happens in the world, but God did not set up the world to operate in that way. Rather, God created a hierarchy of creation. And therefore, God is not personally judging the world, but rather, God set intermediaries in place whose purpose is to be like eyes that roam through the world. And these eyes, God's angels, are like gods witnessing what takes place in the world, but it's actually taking place through his agents. And therefore, it's described in the language of angels going to sea, coming in testimony, others speaking in favor, others in fault. Judgment takes place in the courtroom of these angels. That's all an allegory. It's analogy. But what it really means is that God is not doing this directly, but rather the whole hierarchy that God created to distance God from creation in order for creation to be able to exist. That whole hierarchy includes within it a system of self-judgment. Yes, self-judgment. And there are energies in the world which, as it were, are aware of what's going on, have the divinely ordained ability to judge what they see, to make and express opinion about it regarding to what extent human beings should be considered culpable or not, what favor could be brought, or what points could be brought in their favor, and so forth and so on. And all of this takes place independently within the hierarchy of creation. Of course, God is aware of everything that's going on. It's not like it operates independently entirely, but it does operate through, it's like a system that operates through the auspices of God. Okay? And if you ask, so if it's all created by God, and it's all known by God, and it's all run and conducted through the auspices and the power of God, so why is it described as being separate? Why can't we just say God does it himself? So it's not an easy question to answer, but I suggested an answer just a minute ago where I'm saying that this is in order to maintain the necessary distance between God and creation. Because if God were too fully in creation, then creation would implode back into God again. And therefore, God withdraws. A system which is based on hierarchy is created, spiritual and physical, and all of the judgment that takes place vis-a-vis providence, the venue of providence, is part of that system as well. It's kind of a difficult, interesting idea. Something elaborates more inside the book of Derech Hashem itself. Okay, let's end here. And tomorrow we'll go into the more mystical topic of prophecy. And what's that about and how that works.